Welcome to Public Comment. I'm John Dunbar, former mayor of Yountville.
And I'm Alfredo Pedroza, former Napa County supervisor.
And I'm Dr. John Melmahay, proctologist.
That's so awesome.
So that's how this is going to go. Thank you for joining us as we talk about politics, people, and whatever else the doctor wants to.
Or Barry Martin.
You have to be willing to live with yourself and your decision making. And there are some people that sell themselves out.
We have to make sure that we hold elected officials accountable.
There's been radicalization on both sides of
It's governance by the lowest denominator. There's so many comments I can respond to that, but I'm not. That's good.
Yeah, leave it.
So, Alfredo, we have a special guest whose name, you're a man of many names.
Yes.
So why don't you just tell us about one of them?
All right. Well, you want the sincere thing.
I don't.
You get to pick which one you tell us about.
I will tell you briefly about my own self, my favorite person, Barry Martin, born and raised in Joplin, Missouri, and came to California in 1986. And I'm very glad that I made that choice. Napa's been my home ever since then.
86, John was in high school back then.
Yeah.
Is that right?
I can't remember that far back.
Oof. I've become extremely old. It's striking me right now. So
No comment. Barry and I are going to get along great.
So
public comment with no comment.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? I just wanted to start off acknowledging or thanking you for welcoming us the day that we launched this, January 16th of this year. You had us on your morning radio show along with Taylor, and thank you very much for that. That really inspired us to talk right into the microphone.
Well, you could have told us, Barry, that this was a rough business, that you make no money, that you have no sponsors, and then you bleed every month. So thank you for that sage advice, by the way.
You know, people need to learn things on their own.
I've done my fair share of learning,
right?
But fair enough. This was a new venture. So lesson learned.
Yeah. I think podcasts, like radio shows, have value of their own, intrinsic value, whether you're making any money off of it or not. And I'm glad you guys are doing this, because I believe local people here in Napa Valley are dying for local content. Yeah. Anybody locally talking about, writing about, reporting on anything local, they want to eat that up, right?
But how do you balance it? Sorry to interrupt, John, but look, you've been on both sides of this, right, Barry? You're the city PIO, and I think I was there briefly when I was on the city council. And I'll give you a compliment. I've always thought you've been fair, right, in terms of how you report out. You called balls and strikes very fairly. In a time when there might have been some pressure to call it a strike or to call it a ball because of the monetization of the media. And I hit on that in the previous podcast against my favorite paper. But like, you talked about the locals and the residents of wanting information. But that's hard. When you have a business model, and there is a business model to, whether it's radio, print, or whatever it may be, or TV, there's this eyeball sensation, right? You want eyeballs and clicks and attention. But how do you balance that with like the truth and the facts? And you've been through it, right? So give us a little flavor on that.
Coming from a media perspective or from the city perspective?
Let's do media overall.
Okay, so the way I approach it, and this is timely based on what's going on with 60 Minutes right now. There's a very bright line you have to draw between what we used to call programming and sales.
Really?
Right. And that's a journalistic model, and that exists in every legacy media that people ridicule now, the legacy media, the mainstream media, blah, blah, blah. That's bullshit. Those people establish these concepts and these ideas. Edward R. Murrow, CBS News, the integrity of, I don't care what the sales manager is saying, that I shouldn't have said that about Clorox.
Yeah.
Or done that story.
So that's the fact side of the equation.
You've got to stay on the public interest side. The public has a right to know.
Yeah.
In the case of broadcasting, you're licensed by the federal government to provide information objectively, not one-sidedly. That was the origin of it. It got changed over time.
Right? I'm glad you're talking. I think this is so timely, by the way, to your point.
So you have to have a sense of, in my mind, this has become my home, and I want to do what's right for my home community. But I would feel the same way if I worked in some other market. People need information. People need objectively delivered information based on facts with sources behind it. A little opinion. And I obviously inject some opinion into what I do on the radio. I did a lot less when I was younger, but as I've gotten older, it's like, well, I think I've got some credential
You've earned it.
perspective, right? I've done enough to say this is right, or this does not seem right to me. And listeners can make up their mind. If they don't like it, they'll turn it off, right? But to me, what we do in any kind of journalism, from the tiniest little town in America to New York City, be honest, be straightforward, understand your mission, and don't be influenced by pressures from outside.
But that's 180 degrees different than what we're seeing right now, especially at the national level, but even locally, the pressure to tell a narrative. And now everybody is a journalist on Nextdoor and
Facebook.
on social media. And what's really lost, you brought up Edward R. Murrow. When I grew up, he was an icon.
In the
When we grew up,
in the 60s.
yeah, you weren't around yet, but
Yeah, just point of reference for the listeners.
there was credibility. There was reliability to a news source. I struggle to find, where do I get an honest story, whether it's local or national, global. And I'm constantly searching to try to mix different perspectives, because there's the far left one, there's the far right one, there's sometimes some toward the middle.
What are the news websites or papers you read on a regular basis?
I'll bounce from, if I'm watching TV, I'll bounce from MSNBC to Fox to CNN, and it's amazing how different they are. They're telling the same story. And actually, often what I'll do is try to watch at the beginning, where you're supposed to be in that A block of the most important news. And even that, MSNBC will find X will be the most important thing.
Sure.
Typically Trump related right now. But then Fox News will do a totally different story, and that their audiences want what they're telling them.
But to that point though, John, so you mentioned Fox News to some of our circle of friends, and they create an instant reaction, right? And then you mentioned CNN. And to me, that's what's changed, Barry, this polarization of, like I would tell some friends, because I'm like you, John, I want to listen to all these podcasts. And it's like, I'll listen to Joe Rogan and, Obama's buddies. And it's like, oh, you listen to Joe Rogan? I'm like, yeah, because I want to hear what everyone has to say. But then you get categorized. And so you've been in this space for a long time, right? Like you get from PIO to radio. What is causing this polarization? And like, I'm going to label you because you listen to Joe Rogan or you listen to CNN with John in the morning. Like, why is that happening? Right.
I think the broad word for it is tribalism, and that's what's developed. People had their political preference when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s.
I just
right?
mentioned 60s. I'm not saying that's when it happened, but go ahead.
Yeah, right. And there were moments in time in my lifetime where people started to call each other out to a degree. The Vietnam War is a good example of that, right? My country, right or wrong, love it or leave it, all those attitudes.
A little patriotism in there, yeah.
Patriotism and nationalism and anger, the beginning of anger. And then, the Reagan era was very difficult for liberal people largely because he was successful. He was conservative and he was successful. And then times and tastes change and things happen over this long arc. But people have played on the polarization. They have made money on polarization. They have won office on polarization. You both know, I should say, as former politicians, I don't think it's as intense in Mayor of Yountville race, maybe.
I haven't been spades,
but the politicians at the state and national level run one way in the primary and a different way in the general election, right?
Well, we would talk
Especially
about
national level.
You talk about you get elected through one message and you govern through a different one, to your point, right? And it's based off, populism and trying to understand what moves the needle. But going back to what you said earlier, because I really understood what you said about programming and sales, right? And that struck with me because I think we're grappling with that in this very moment, though, Barry, of you have one side of the ledger putting their thumb on the scale. And the folks on programming are probably getting a little outweighed based off sales. That's just, again, I'm a receiver of a message, so I can only speak individually. But even from the local paper, right, or the regional papers, there's definitely something that sells. And whether you talk about our favorite paper, not one of our favorite papers, but the Chronicle that loves to shit on Napa, and one of the writer lives in Napa, where I'm not going to mention their name.
Are you talking about Jess?
Yes, there you go.
You got to call people out by name.
But yeah, but you know, there's 400 other cities. Move to one you like and stop shitting on the place you live in. That's just my opinion, right? But like I say that because that's to me the sales side of the equation, you know, Barry. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, provocative stories that get clicks.
Yeah,
that's your job, and that's Hearst. That's a Hearst paper from William Randolph Hearst, who was the first yellow journalist in American history.
But hold on,
and I'm not saying Jess. I don't want to say Jess. I like Jess. I think she writes great stuff. But I understand where you're coming from. But it's provocative on purpose.
But why?
On purpose is to get somebody to read it.
But hold on, but I want to challenge you a little bit. So you're right. But I'm going back to what you said, programming and sales. Mm-hmm. So you have someone writing a piece. Aren't they a programmer? Aren't they a reporter? Aren't they writing an article about the integrity, the facts?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's also this, what I see, that being trying to get eyeballs and clicks. And that's the sales side.
I think it becomes almost instinctive, and I don't think a reporter needs to be getting a message from the sales manager to try to write a story that's engaging and will get comments and reactions. And one way to know whether people are reading your paper or listening to your radio station or podcast is when you get reactions.
True.
And I think Jess Lander and the other, I'm blanking on her name, the other primary wine, Esther Mobley, terrific writers, have elevated what's going on in terms of coverage of the wine industry and the wine business. It's not all positive, right? It's not all positive, and
fair point.
I think they're on target. They're talking to people, right? They're quoting sources and stories that they've talked to who said this and this and this, right?
But
that's what some people think. That's kind of in the category. Yeah. This is what some people think.
But that's the thing. Some people think. They also hesitate to tell the rest of the story because it isn't as salacious. And so the full story isn't being offered. I go back to, since we're getting all nostalgic, you know, I was a reporter. One of my first jobs was writing for a local newspaper in South Lake Tahoe. And
dog eat dog market up there.
It was two state
in the 70s.
It was Nevada and California.
And you had
really controlled by the casinos.
Some days you had to put on long pants to go into work. Probably.
I was one of the few people that wore a coat and tie that wasn't a pit boss. But I took it very seriously about getting.
Yes, I'm out of wine.
Yeah, we're going to get you more. This is John Dunbar's
all sides of the story were critical. That's not true anymore in a lot of cases. Now it's not only are you telling, and again, we're overgeneralizing a little bit, but it seems acceptable now to present part of a story as if it's the complete story. And then you put it behind a paywall to force people to buy it, to see it. And also you post on social media so more people see it. And
you're talking about the Register now?
It's not just the Register. I see the Press Democrat
do it. Have they sold yet or no?
Democrat.
I don't know. Did they sell recently?
Press Democrat did.
Sorry. Maybe I'm forecasting the Napa Register.
But because it is all about the eyeballs and the clicks. So the full and honest story isn't as important as the monetization of it.
I would say to a great number of people that are in that particular entity, whether we're talking about the Register or the radio station I work for or the Press Democrat or anybody else, things have changed in the sense that revenue doesn't come easily anymore. The internet devalued, right? Destroyed classified advertising completely. Craigslist destroyed classifieds. Everything else, if I can buy, for example, 3,000 impressions on a Facebook ad for $65, and I factor that in and say, oh, Google ads, maybe I could run some Google ads. What if I do this internet thing as well? Versus a serious dollar commitment to, let's say, an advertising schedule in a local newspaper or a radio station or whatever it is. It's not very difficult. You guys are both businessmen. You understand. You go over here and say, well, for a $4,000 budget of advertising, I get this many impressions and this much feedback with metrics versus this sort of vague advertising, and people will say, how many people listen to the radio these days? How many people read the newspaper, the actual physical newspaper, or subscribe to the newspaper? Those are all difficult questions for modern media because it's fractionalized. Somebody might be listening to the public comment podcast instead of my morning show. What a stupid decision on their part.
Yeah.
They should watch after they listen to your show in the morning.
That's so political.
But I mean, the amount of money, let me give you an example. In 1984, I think, I was at a radio station in Iowa. I still have a rate card, the ad reps took out to sell the advertising. And I think our top 1 minute ad rate was $60. Okay. $1980. $60 for a minute. We had no ratings at all. We were a brand new station in the market, but the owners, pretty savvy guys, understood where they thought they could start at. And we sold ads based on that rack rate of $60 a minute. I defy you to find a radio station below the top 100 in the country who can get $60 a minute right now.
Wow.
KGO used to get something like $2,000 a minute in their good days. So check and see what they get now, and you'll understand. Same with newspapers. Look at the number of column inches of ads, no classifieds. The only thing they have really to rely on is legal notices, you know?
But so Barry, you're hitting on something though that, and I'm a business person, right? And I believe in the free enterprise and people trying to do what's best for themselves and the family. But I'm struggling with like social media and media, right? Because when you create a business model, I can't fault the owners for making business decisions. I can't. Like, I understand that. But the struggle I'm having, and I'd love your take on it, is when you have a citizenry or community that is, they're not predicting, but they hope for purity. They hope for honest messaging. So you have a receiver of something that wants honest truth. You have a provider that has different ways on that scale. And I just don't know how you marry those two, right? Because there's no harmony there, right? So then you create social media next door, different platforms, and then you have our wonderful friends that think they're reporters, but they're not. So then it's confusion, right? So again, I'm not one that wants more regulation on most cases, but are we at a point where there has to be a regulatory fix for this? Or is it just, let's see where it goes, right? But like, I give you the example of where it does impact public safety. During the fires, you had people, and I can tell you a personal story in my district. We had people on Facebook saying there's people that are, trespassing and there's robbery, and they were putting that message out there on social media. So then we respond to that. We're using public resources when there is nothing going on, right? So like, how do you hold people accountable for that? And that's my struggle. I think about my kids, like how they're going to grow up. And I don't want them to listen to Fox or CNN. I just want them to have a reliable source where they have critical thinking and they make the best decisions based off people and their own critical thinking.
Well, they have Barry Martin in the morning
There's
show.
that.
I know Barry's going to live forever. Like,
Exactly.
I know that, especially because he drinks red wine like I do.
Right. Good for the
in
heart.
good volume. I completely agree. And that's a resounding endorsement.
Unfortunately, I'm out.
It was before he keeps whining about it. We're going to pause right now so you can go get another bottle.
Thank God.
And find that so that
That's a first ever. And
yes, we're putting a pause on
I'm
it.
so thirsty, guys.
I don't know if our producer's going to handle that, but they have to now because you called it out.
That's right.
Sorry.
You just asked an incredibly long fucking question. You want to repeat it? The last 5 minutes of it? Jeez. Do you remember what it was?
I forgot you could say fuck on the podcast. I mean, fuck, fuckity fuck, fuck.
We might actually have to edit that part.
The mon.
Oh, come on.
I forget what I said. I'm not going to just keep.
It wasn't very important.
It was very important.
Thanks for getting me some more wine, guys.
You're welcome. All right. Should plug it.
Yeah. So normally I'm
don't plug it. Just a minute ago.
Normally I'm a continuity freak, so watching movies and notice when all of a sudden a wine glass that goes from empty to full happens. And I'm like, stop it and pause it and bring it back. And Jerry's like, stop messing with it. So somebody might want to stop the podcast and go back and realize that Barry's got a full glass of wine, or at least a refilled glass of wine.
It's not really wine. It's Merlot. I wouldn't really call that wine.
Oh my God.
But go ahead. Go ahead.
This is a guy who's growing cab, and so
Oh.
he just shit talks a really good varietal.
What would,
Hey,
what would a good cab be without some Merlot to blend in?
I'm
Come
just
on.
like the papers. I'm the sales side of the equation. I'm not the programming side. I just want to sell cab.
I mean, Napa's already, cabs are king in Napa. You don't have to be
That's true. I don't
beat
want
them down.
I don't
Come
want to put
on.
my thumb on the scale. Fair enough. You can have Merlot on Wednesday, but today's not Wednesday. All right. But in a crisis, you have what you can.
So I want to kind of transition a little bit to how does everything that we've been talking about really translate locally? You're on every morning talking to the Napa Valley community, and how do you kind of balance what you're
That's a good
presenting?
question.
I know that you do a lot of very local focused content. You have guests on that represent what's happening locally, and you share some of your, I'll call them monologues, whatever you want to call them, where you sometimes drill down on topics that have generated interest, whether they've been in another, media, newspaper, whatever, or it's just kind of the buzz in the Valley. So how do you make sure that you're representing fairly balanced, truthful, when we were just talking about how there's kind of that pressure to tell the story that sells more or gets more listeners?
I always, when I'm talking on the radio, and I talk extemporaneously without notes almost all the time,
I can relate.
right?
And you use words like extemporaneous.
And when I'm talking, I'm trying to always think about a variety of people that might be listening. And I have friends who are very different from me politically, who I respect and love and care about. And I believe everybody's entitled to their political perspective, their view of the world,
Totally.
right? And so I want to watch what I'm saying so that what my personal beliefs are don't influence everything I say to the point where someone feels excluded or like I'm not being fair. Like I look for opportunities to say, on the other hand, whereas that's not what modern media has become. People who are doing talking head shows on right wing or left wing media rarely will say, on the other hand, okay, pick your two contrasting people and listen to see do they ever give the other side of the story. Tariffs, okay, hot button issue right now. Some people believe what President McKinley believed and what Donald Trump believed about tariffs. You can control markets that way and so on and so forth, that it's beneficial. Others believe that it will undermine your economy and the world has changed. And, President McKinley is 150 years ago.
And the other 45 presidents didn't agree.
There's that, right? So you can present both sides of a thing and still sometimes, as I try to do, present myself as who I am, what I believe in consistently. It's always been important to me from the day I started in radio. I've never used a fake name, right? I use
Except on this podcast.
Well,
and he used two different ones.
Actually, yeah. John Cocktosin is my legal name.
He's a great person, by the way.
But no, even though Harry Martin was a very well-known local figure when I came to Napa in '86 and got on the radio, and people would say, Barry Martin, Harry Martin, are you related? And then I had a friend or two who would say, yeah, he's Harry's son. Harry's his dad. And they would make fun of me and do that, right? Which I completely hated. But if I had known about him, I would have used a fake name probably, right? Because he was not my kind of journalist. In fairness, he did root out a lot of true things through the sources that he had inside the city of Napa and the county of Napa and other places.
But to your point,
he would touch on very real things that were happening and then, blow them out of proportion and also write about black helicopters.
But to your point though, Barry, you said something like tariffs, right? Like it's even hard to have a conversation with friends around it because within the first minute, people entrench back into their camps. Then it becomes divisive. And it's like, we're about to take a trip to Mexico with some friends. And it's almost like I have to create a list of talking points, of what you might say or not, right? Because it rubs people the wrong way. And I think you got to go back to a point where it's okay to disagree. Like, if I disagree with you, I don't hate you. I just, look, I hope you challenge me to make me better. And it comes with maturity. But again, like, I think what would be great for our listeners to say, how has it changed? And how have you seen the people that are receiving the message? How has that changed the way you try to tell the story? Because you kind of illustrated that you have friends on both sides, right? And sometimes you try to say, well, the other side, right? But like, I hope that if we're friends, you can trust my message and challenge me. But I feel like we're walking that back a little bit.
Uh, I'm not sure what you mean by walking it back.
That we're more guarded sometimes.
More guarded
Yeah.
to give your real opinion on
because of the
we
conflict.
Are.
Yeah.
We
So
are.
So you're not attacked because of your opinion.
Yes.
You know, there's been radicalization on both sides of the center. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Right?
True.
People have gone more extreme by far than what I grew up with, right? When the difference between, for example, growing up, my household, school, town I grew up in, I don't think I really knew the Republican or Democratic affiliation of anyone. It just
Agreed.
Their parents, the kids I knew growing up.
You played ball with whoever, right? Soccer, whatever.
Right, exactly. I lived in Minnesota. I lived in Iowa.
So then it was hockey.
Okay.
Everybody, as long as you're into hockey, you're cool. I attended the Iowa caucuses when I lived in Iowa. That's how civically engaged I was. It was an election year. A great experience. You meet in a school cafeteria and decide who gets nominated for president. But I was always, engaged, but those differences were not very sharp. And, if you want to really delve into where it all started, it's Newt Gingrich, right? Go back and look at Newt Gingrich in 1990, shutting down the government, right? That was the beginning of this hardball style. I'm not saying that Democrats didn't do tricky things or dirty things before that or in that period, but that really is the departure point of this different way of attacking it. And there were people, I believe, in the 1990s when Bill Clinton got elected on the right who were very afraid that the Republican Party would be gone in a few years if they didn't step it up.
So that's where that
not too different from the way some people on the Democratic side feel right now. Like, what are we about? Who are we? We're losing all of a sudden, right? That's the thing in the Democratic Party.
You're seeing that. So look, I hear you about the identity crisis sometimes, and you double down on the negative side.
By the way, you're making me drink just talking about it,
and I love it because this is stimulating in a way that I think we need to have this conversation, right? But it goes. I first saw it running for office in 2012. I could say I rode the Obama wave, right? There was this acceptance of newness. And then it's like, oh shit, you're in office. And then the attacks come, right? It's like, oh shit, you're not part of it, right? But it was this polarization that I hadn't seen before. And then it happened and it gets multiplied. But it's part of this brand building that I'm seeing. And I don't know if that's the point you're referencing, right? Of people seeing this fork in the road. But what I'm seeing, and I think it'd be great to talk a little bit about politics a little bit because you've covered it. But I've seen a shift in how people campaign around the popularness, the popular vote. And then it's like when you govern, you keep governing on what's popular versus what's right. And I came up through the era of you make tough decisions. But if those tough decisions are the right thing, it gets you reelected. Now you got to raise a shit ton of money. And I always had to because I always got attacked. But it was like you're building something better. And I'm seeing this shift. And I think the media has a role to play in it, Barry, of the brand building, the narrative shift, where people are making decisions based off what's popular. And it's creating this extremism a little bit, right?
Well, and in a way, think how often we talk about polling and think how reliant people are from the local level to the national level on polling, even outside of politics, the whole Q score and entertainment and all that. We didn't have that in the era that I think of as the good old days and the growing up, right? That was not prevalent, and you couldn't get those immediate impressions of what the direction to go is. There used to be a joke about George Bush, the first George Bush, is
the 90s.
I'm going to take a very solid position on this as soon as I find out which way the public is going. Right? That was the joke, and it's so true. It was true then, it's true now, that we all want, we want success, we want to be liked, we choose the path of least resistance. But what you said earlier about the question between doing what's right and doing what's popular, I think all of us who are entitled enough to have any, in my case, a microphone to talk into, or in your guys' cases, in the past, not in the future, elected office, you got to do what's right. That's really what you're going to care about when the day is done, not what's popular, right? Is that true?
I agree, but we could talk about, John, our experience.
What you're doing your best you can do with the information you have right now.
But
you have to be willing to live with yourself and your decision making.
That's it.
And there are some people that sell themselves out, whether it's to get reelected. Because I never made a decision because I thought that it would get me reelected. Frankly,
but people will push back on us, John. Though on that, I think it's fair to say that you and I would be labeled as pro-business wine industry electeds.
That is correct.
But that's different.
But you're right.
Okay, I'm good with that. But it also doesn't mean that we're anti-environment or anti-anything else.
Which
is a California pro-business position. Right?
But that's the quandary that we're in, right? Like we're hitting on it. Just because you're pro-business doesn't mean you're anti. And we've talked about that.
That's right.
But I think I've seen you made tough decisions. Some I disagree with, but people would go to your dives and they'd lambast you, but you said, "Hey, I believe in this," and you made that decision. And I think you're losing sight of that, right? Because of the comments, or what you go through. You're at line in the grocery store and people would, lambast you. And to me, I wish we would go back in the day where there was no polling, because if you're out in the community, you hear about it, right? That is
the polling,
but
I mean, that's the real polling.
But we're not scared of it though, right? How many times would you'd be at the grocery store and people would say, "I want to talk to you about this." I'm like, hey, damn, it's
only every day.
But that's
dog walking.
But that's a reflection of the community pulse, right? And you got to be mature enough to take that in versus a polling exercise. And I think so much of what we're seeing, Bear, to your point, is I think it's this instant verification or validation that we're seeing that is shaping the discourse. And even like on tariffs, I'm like, again, not to go national, but I was like, I get the intent. I think the implementation is flawed, but I get the intent. I get what folks might want to do, but you can't even talk about the specifics, because then people, it's like, well, you're this or you're that. I was like, let's have an intellectual conversation.
Yeah, I like, personally, like we were talking about earlier, reading different sources, listening to different sources across the spectrum. And there's an amazing media bias chart that I've shared on social media before. And I can't remember the agency or nonprofit that puts it together, but it sort of puts everything out on a spectrum, left to right. And who's in the middle, right? The Associated Press, NPR, contrary to what some people think.
Aren't they getting defunded or something?
And you can just see, Christian Science Monitor is a very reliable centrist publication of the news, the way they cover the news. And you can, Reuters, I mentioned earlier, Reuters, they're right in the center of that. And then it tapers out like this, and you get MSNBC is way over here, and Fox News is way over here. But, Fox News is degraded by their talk shows. Their actual news coverage is not the same as their talk shows. Yeah. So there's like a discrepancy in there.
So sorry if I was cutting off your statement, but I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about something that's really much more local. And frankly, people are probably tired of politics. And
I never get tired of politics, John.
I know, but maybe some of the folks that are watching and listening to this, because you cannot look at social media without being just consumed by some friends, some strangers, just obsessed about what's going on. So I'd rather talk about community theater.
Oh gosh, I don't know anything about that.
Because, you have been...
Alfredo, do you know anything about community theater?
No, but I should.
You should, and you should support it.
I got kids.
That's the biggest challenge for community theater. The people you most want to come to the theater have kids and daycare or babysitters.
I'll give you a perspective, really, but go ahead, because I'll give you...
There are theaters who literally have daycare provisions to build younger audiences, right?
I'm curious.
Because you get to go to the theater when your kids leave home. That's kind of what happens, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So you've been in communications basically your whole
Yep.
career
Yep.
and entertainment to a degree.
I mean, it's not always entertaining. Is that what you're saying?
No, that
Got you.
entertainment and journalism aren't exactly the same
They're
thing.
not.
They've
Yeah.
become the same, but
Thank you for making the distinction.
I thought you were going down politics.
Me
You're
too.
shifting
I don't know.
to theater.
What is your point, John?
yeah, I'm sick of the politics.
I thought we were barely getting started.
Community theater, I think, was the
Community
topic.
theater
Yes.
was the topic because I've been able to enjoy some of your performances over the years, and I hope people appreciate. They could always appreciate more what you and Taylor co-founded and what you're doing to provide this level of entertainment. It's a very personal way to experience entertainment, theater, the arts, and so that was a tough pivot for you. I have to believe, to make that kind of commitment. Tell us a little bit about how that came together, how it's going now, because it's been several years now.
Mhm. The tough pivot, you mean to start the theater company?
On top of everything else you're still
Yeah.
doing, right? So knowing that it would be, you found a location that you've been able to call your own now, but community theater, I think, fundamentally is challenging to finance and challenging to sustain. But you've been able to do it for many years now. So how is that going, and how do you see it fitting into the Napa Valley community?
Oh, wow. How much time do we have?
I'm going to go back to politics after this question, Barry, but
I'll try to keep this as short as I can. So I've been a theater person kind of all my life, but most engaged from probably sophomore in high school to where it was like, I love this more than I love football and baseball and all the stuff that I did that consumed me before that time. I was an early bloomer, and I was a jock, and I dominated the little boys. Okay.
Nice.
And that was sweet for a few years.
Yes.
But I also loved music. I used to sit next to my sister on the piano bench, and she would play this sound of music, and I would sing with her. And then it was Mary Poppins. And that's kind of how I got introduced to musical theater and all these things. I had 3 older sisters, and my dad was a very traditional working man. And we played baseball, right? And he pitched to me every day if I wanted to hit some baseballs. He had a field behind the house until he was 56 years old. He pitched to me. He worked in a factory, in a machine shop, and it was oily and dirty, but he would pitch
America.
right? And bless his soul, right? So there was a moment where it dawned on me, this is what I have to do, this theater thing, this experience of catharsis. Is that a word we're all familiar with, right, everybody? Catharsis, the experience of a purging of emotions, a Greek word for, when you cry at the movie, when you feel joy at a dance number.
Sounds very emotional. So
right?
I'm just going to tear up.
When a symphony makes you roll your eyes back, and that's a catharsis of the arts. And I've discovered, as time has passed, the only truth in the world comes from art. Truth does not come from politics. Truth does not come from civic affairs. Truth does not come from daily life with the people you love and care about. You're constantly sorting that out. But the arts can provide you truth for a moment. A piece of music, a painting, a dance, a piece of theater, right? And so I denied theater for many years while I worked in radio because it fulfilled that part of me. I was a theater major in college, and then I went into radio when I was a senior in college. And before I knew it, I was full time, and it was a regular paycheck. And I could, back in those days, pay the bills, raise a family, right, and be a breadwinner on a radio station salary. Imagine that.
Wow.
Does not happen today, except for a few of the major markets, probably. But I always wanted to do theater. That was my first love and what I really wanted to do as a professional. And the opportunity didn't come until my kids were grown and out of the house. And I thought, why am I not doing this now? Because I've raised my children. I don't get up at 5 a.m. to do radio at this point. This was 2008 or so. I auditioned for a show at the old Dreamweavers Theater, got cast in it, and that's where I met Taylor. And the two of us, just like magnets, were like the ways we thought about theater and what we wanted to do, what we imagined could be possible. She was a native of Napa who went everywhere else around to do theater because there wasn't enough theater in Napa, right? And so that's what birthed Lucky Penny. And we just decided, let's make a play. And we got an opportunity. We did it and it worked. And we, just let's do another play. And then before you know it, we were thinking about having a place and extending that out. And the rest is history, as they say. But it's very, very difficult. You want to keep your ticket price accessible for regular people, which to me, like our top price right now is $47. To me, $47 is still a lot of money, right? So that's, I don't see going, insane. You can't do it off of tickets. You need fundraising, you need sponsors, you need people who will fund you with grants. What we do is not real grant friendly, to be honest, because we're trying to be a popular theater. We're not like helping formerly incarcerated men get back into the society, which is a great cause, and theater is beautiful for that, but we don't do that, right? So it's very challenging. You're trying to sing for your supper, as we always say, like do shows that are good enough. People will pay that ticket price and buy a raffle ticket and buy a drink and buy a snack.
If you have red wine, I think that's a great draw.
Wine. Yes, we have.
But look, I commend you for that, because it is hard, to your point, though.
Thanks, John.
As someone that I'm looking at my phone because I have to do soccer practice.
I saw you were annoyed with
soccer
me.
Practice.
You're bored with me.
No, not bored, but like as a dad, you think about, I got a kid in tutoring, and then I got sports, and you can totally relate. But that's life, right? And you talk about life in America. It's like you have all these responsibilities, but I grew up in a household where arts was a privilege, right? And then as you grow up, you want your kids to do better, and you understand there's a side of the brain that art exercises that's different than Excel sheets, which is what I tell my kids. So you learn to appreciate what you didn't have, right? It's just in a daily life, it's hard, to your point.
It is.
Right. And that's what we're all grappling with. So even though I was maybe critical of you asking that question in the beginning, John, I'm glad you did.
Which one was that?
The Lucky Penny and exposing the other side of the brain, which I think is good. But I want to go to the other side now, if that's cool, because I think we got to wrap up.
Okay.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
That's what I said.
Just getting warmed up.
But, I think we'll
do another episode.
But you've been around politics, Barry, for a while, right? Going back to, you mentioned Harry, and maybe, Ed Henderson, rest in peace, right? To Jill Tackle, to others. And we're outside of it. So we try not to be too critical, right? To, quarterback from the couch, but it just feels like the environment is changing around governance, around politics.
Locally?
Yeah. But what's your, without naming names, maybe.
In what way is it changing in your mind?
In terms of, the brand building, right? More of the superficial stuff. And maybe that's my individual take.
I think you're talking about, just to clarify, people in elected office that are more about the selfie than the actual representing a community interest.
The grind, right? Like in the trenches of governing and making tough decisions, right?
I mean, we've learned, unfortunately, from the national level especially, but locally also, it's a privilege to be in office, to have people trust that you can lead them in the community. And we hope that the intentions are genuine and the decision-making is genuine. I think that's what you're talking about.
That's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
And it's not, and again, like we say, people are going to criticize us. Oh, easy for you to say that now. But I believe that we did live it that way, that those were the priorities on. There were decisions I would make that I personally didn't always feel was the best decision, but I did it because it was the right decision for our community. And yes, Yountville's a small community, but we both engaged at a much higher level. Alfredo, you were so instrumental in bringing in so much additional revenue and support from regional and state levels that often goes underappreciated, if not completely unappreciated. And I know the commitment that I made, and I see some of our electeds with that same kind of commitment, but not all. And
Who in particular?
there are
I like
some
that.
folks that you
Well
can,
done, Barry.
yeah, yeah. We're hoping to have another podcast after this, but frankly, I'd be curious to if there was a way to do a poll and find out what people thought of their own leadership that are in elected office right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, look, I'll tell you.
That's my way of getting out of answering.
I thought that was a great question, Barry. You put him on the spot.
I've been in this business in a while.
But here's the thing. I'll tell you, like, you get into this field, Barry, to measure, to do things, right, at the end of the day. And you did shit, John, right? And Bill Dodd did things. And, Jill Teckle did things like flood control, right? The transformation of downtown, the specific plan, Oxbow, her fingerprints are on that, in my opinion, right? Dodd, you could criticize him, but there's measurable things.
Let's have a little segment on criticizing Bill Dodd, shall we?
Okay, go ahead.
That'll be part 2.
You go first.
Okay. But what I mean by that, like, there's measurable things. And I think we're not, we're transferring into a moment where it's governance by the lowest denominator.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is, tell me outcomes that people are achieving, right, Barry? And to me, I can tell you things that you did, Chris did, Bill did, Jill did, even Mark Luce did, like with the workforce proximity program. There's something there that's tangible. And I do think we got to go back to measuring electeds through outcomes. Like, tell me what you did. Scott Sedgley's a friend. And I've talked to Scott. I was like, tell me what you stand for. Your legacy is going to mean what once you're done. And if you have to pause to answer that, that's a concern, right? And that's what I mean by, it doesn't mean we agree with the outcome, by the way, right? Like if Scott says, hey, I want to do PLA, phenomenal. That's what you believe in. And I think we just have to go back to like not tearing things down, but building from what we did. And we're not in a moment right now that I look at the cohort of elected officials where there's this, how do we build from what we did? And maybe I'm totally out of left field or right field, depends on what side of this fence you're on. But that's what I don't think is happening right now. And again, you can disagree, but I'd love your just take on that.
Oh, man, it's complicated.
I know.
Narrow that down to one specific question, please.
I love this. To me, do you see elected officials trying to accomplish things that are pulling people together? And don't say the general plan. We're gonna drink on
We
that.
have to drink this.
Yeah.
And let me give you an example. Like when Jill was leading, trying to get flood control, she was harnessing up Valley mayors, down Valley mayors to do something, right? Bill Dodd, the Trancas flyover, it was marshaling resources, say, hey, you're not going to get your local road paved, but we're going to do this. We can all point to something where it was about pulling people together, harmony, right? And I'm just not seeing that right now. And again, I can be colored because I acknowledge we're former electeds, Barry. So sometimes it's easier to see it from the chair than the dais, right? You can come in and say, hey, you guys are fucking wrong. And that's okay too.
I appreciate what you just said, that everything is probably easier when you're not sitting in
Totally.
the chair.
Yes. True? Fair point.
I don't, my honest opinion is I don't feel a significant dissatisfaction, right, among the general population toward Napa City Council or the Napa County Board of Supervisors. St. Helena's kind of got its own thing going on. Yountville seems to be what Yountville always is. And Calistoga, bless your hearts, everybody's crazy in Calistoga and we all accept that, right? Do your thing. We love you. We'll come up once in a while and spend some money.
Mud bath.
Right? I mean, there's just some truths in the world. Everybody's got to find their footing in these different positions. Sometimes, the soccer world, Alfredo, we used to talk soccer when I worked for the city. You'd come by my cubicle.
Yeah, I remember
we'd
that.
talk about soccer for a little while. There are caretakers in the soccer world. You know that term,
That
right?
is true.
Right?
That's
the caretaker manager.
That's a great perspective.
Right? Nothing is really
that's okay.
Needed to be done right now that's revolutionary, but someone needs to be in charge and that everyone will listen to. And we may be in a phase like that. I would love to have a conversation about, as I've watched some of your other episodes here, about winery regulation and all these other topics, and this moment we're in right now where the economy has changed and the wine demand has changed. That would be fun to talk about at length. But to a certain degree, I've said this on the air a few times about national politics and every politics. What people mostly want from government is consistency. They want to feel confident that tomorrow will be the same as yesterday in the basic ways. We're not getting that on the national level. We're probably going to go into a phase where we don't get that on the state level with Newsom leaving, right? There's going to be a lot of different thoughts and ideas about how California should go forward. But I've always said that local government is the most important government, right? It's the closest to you. It affects your life more than anything else. And it needs to have consistency and a sense of constancy. Like, just because somebody's in the mayor's seat who's not the former mayor doesn't mean things are going to change for me radically.
And I'll just say this because I know you want to wrap up, but I think that terminology.
I don't want to wrap up. I can go all day.
I think John does, but I think
John, why are you so? Come on,
he has to go. Do something around the
I'm
house.
the one that has to go coach
This
soccer.
is like Joe Rogan does like 3 hours.
Exactly, but
You and I can stay behind.
I think Barry, your point of a caretaker, and I think that's not negative in my lens, right? I think it's leadership at the right time for what this community needs.
What do you think needs to happen that's not happening?
Look, I think I take your point it's appropriate, right? Because sometimes you got to be that bull that just goes, but it has to be matched with what your community needs, because leadership is situational. I do believe that fundamentally. And I think our style was you push, you go, you create outcomes. But if the community's not needing that, you have to calibrate to what the community needs. And I think this moment of transition, because of all the chaos, right? Some of it, maybe I created or others, but it is what it is. And that can be a separate topic.
Yeah.
But
I want to come back for that episode.
To your point though, right? I think you have to match the moment for what the moment needs. And that's okay. That's
right.
That's healthy.
That's kind of what I'm saying.
And I believe in that, right? That said, I think we have to make sure that we hold elected officials accountable for making life better.
I could never argue with that. That's
now
kind of
we can debate that.
That's the ultimate end game of, right?
We're going to have to debate that in another episode.
What?
Because we are
already
out of time.
Out of wine?
Now we're out of time for the recording. And so I want to just thank.
Do you pay by the minute?
Yeah.
I want to thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
And
Dr. John, by the way.
Dr. John.
Be appropriate, respectful.
For
cover the Rolling
the conversation. Absolutely, we need to continue this going forward for sure. And you bring
regular guest. I like this.
Yeah.
We just flirted. We didn't even take a deep dive into the topics.
We could do some live radio and some podcasts.
Yeah.
How about that? We'll interact.
This flirtation is real,
because,
John. There's chemistry here.
People want old guys to explain things to them.
John?
And I think we can all, you were just talking about local government, and we can all agree that being a mayor is the most important level of local government.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
I mean, right behind morning show host.
Right, that's right. Small fish in a small pond. Go ahead.
Thanks for the extra line. Is there any more after this, or is that it?
Oh, yeah, we got plenty.
John, I do want to thank you. You threw a little bit of a curveball in there. I was so ready to take a deep dive with Barry on politics, and you asked about Lucky Penny, theater and arts. And that's just a different side of the brain I'm not used to exercising, so I want to thank you for that. But Barry's just so, iconic in the world of media and politics and communication. And we were there, we were going to take a deep dive into it, and you threw a curveball in there, man. So it threw me off.
I think we're going to have Barry back because he has such a great perspective that he gets to share that every morning on the radio. And I'd love to have him come back and keep diving into politics, people, and whatever else is on his mind.
But I think what people are wanting, though, is this authenticness of, they hear the PC version, right? The politically correct version. And what he said today, it really rung true with me of, the media, programming, and sales. And that's something that I think I take away, and the people are going to take away, right? And like that's one of our podcasts. Like, what's different? What's new? And to hear from people give us that perspective, I think taking a deeper dive into politics, it's going to be a little eye-opening, maybe provoking, but new. And I think people want that.
And scene.
Cheers to that.